Hello, and welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. Today we look at a situation that happened between two UK rappers. One that got completely out of hand, as it resulted in a man being sent to prison. George Carpenter, who is also known as Carpo, had carried out a revenge attack at a home in Grove Street, Edge Hill in Liverpool, as part of a rivalry he had with another UK rapper. Liverpool Crown Court heard that Mr Carpenter had bad blood with another rapper in the city of Liverpool, a famous rapper whose name is Tremaine Wiltshire, or as he is more commonly known, Scouse Trapper Tremz. A video which has been seen by thousands of people showed Mr Carpenter's grandmother's home being attacked by a group of men, and then the video was shared on Mr Wiltshire's Instagram account. On the video, shouts of "Carpo, you grass" could be heard being shouted.
Alright, Carpo, you little grass! Smack all of it! Smack you little grasses! Smack the fuck, you little grasses!
Mr Carpenter, who was now enraged after seeing this video, then shared an Instagram live video of himself, in which he made threats to light up the home of a woman who is friends with Mr Wiltshire. In the video, which was made by Mr Carpenter, comments were made such as "silence is deadly," and also goes on to say that "I guarantee that the genie gets put in the bottle."
I'll video my whole journey. Boys, on my mum's life, I'm going to smoke bud with my big brother, and I'm about to conduct some bullshit in that city for yous little mings who want entertainment. Yous will be entertained. Remember I told you that, you fucking little tramps. Bad luck, no smashing windows, none of that shit, bro. On me kids' lives, bro. On me kids' lives, it's different now. Make I tell you now, bro, yeah? If you think I run round all day getting that, yeah, for nothing, you're highly mistaken. Mother's life, it's about to come out, and we're going to play, yeah? I've already ordered the Lecky bike. When I get to Liverpool, silence is deadly. That's all I'm saying, yeah? You're messing. I've got more money than soft cents, lad. I haven't got a clue what I've got for them, lad. Yeah, two's already just being pulled out now. Two of them, yeah. Watch the play that we have today. Yeah? Now it's time for action, boys. Terrorised. Terrorised. I got terrorised. Oh, lad, shut your head out, kid. Shut your head out, kid. Nan's laughing her head off. Me nan's laughing her head off, lad. Hey, me nan's laughing her head off. You haven't got a clue, lad. You haven't got a clue, you fucking little tramp. My nan is actually grinning her head off saying, lad, go and get them. On my kids' lives, yeah. Watch what happens now. Bally, Tremz, your nans, everyone.
The court was told that the group of males who had committed the attack on the home of Mr Carpenter's grandparents have not yet been identified. Mr Carpenter, who was 33 at the time of the attack, had appeared at Liverpool Crown Court alongside Adam Akramoez, who is also 33. Mr Akramoez drove Mr Carpenter and another unknown male from Milton Keynes up to Liverpool to commit the attack. The court had heard that on the way to Liverpool, Mr Akramoez had stopped at a service station and filled up a container with petrol, initially claiming to the police that it was for fuel. However, the judge said in sentencing that you must have had some knowledge of what your co-defendant was going to do with the petrol, though I do accept your plea that you were unaware of the particulars of the plan. When the group had arrived in Liverpool, Mr Carpenter and the unknown male were dropped off close to Grove Street, where they had a short discussion about what was to happen before Mr Carpenter left. Cheryl Mottram, who was prosecuting, said, "The Crown says that it is clear that the unknown male had thrown the petrol bomb through the window, and this was at the instruction of Mr Carpenter." The court had heard that a woman who was luckily awake when she heard a bang went to investigate before realising the curtains in her living room and couch were set alight. Fortunately, she and the other occupants in the house were able to extinguish the fire with the use of a garden hose. Liverpool Crown Court had heard that the victim had suffered significant injuries to her foot due to the broken glass from the window which had smashed, as well as the burns to her hands and fingers, and she now suffered from psychological harm. A fire investigation officer, who was called to investigate the cause of the fire, described a strong smell of petrol, and also discovered a wine bottle near the sofa. Shortly after the attack had happened, Mr Carpenter had uploaded a second video to Instagram, where he now gloated about the arson attack. Mr Carpenter, who gave no address at court, but was previously from Walton in Liverpool, admitted committing arson with intent to endanger life. Mr Carpenter has 9 convictions for 14 offences, which include violent disorder, robbery, possession of drugs, handling stolen goods, possession with intent to supply cannabis, and recently Mr Carpenter was convicted of an affray and failing to surrender, which had resulted in a custodial sentence. Mr Acromoes of Towpath Avenue in Northampton had admitted to arson but said he did not intend to endanger life. The court heard how Mr Acromoes is, prior to the offence, effectively of good character, with only having 1 conviction for failing to surrender in 2010. Mike O'Brien, who was defending Mr Carpenter, said, "The defendant maintains that once he became aware that the fire had started, he had arranged for a male and female to attend the address and warn the occupants." Liverpool Crown Court had heard that the attendance to the address was confirmed in a statement by a woman who had witnessed what had happened. Mr O'Brien went on to explain that Mr Carpenter had pleaded guilty to the crime and had expressed deep remorse in a probation report where he shows an insight to his behaviour. Laban Leek, who was defending Mr Acromoes, had explained that his defendant was effectively offered free drugs to carry out the journey, but has learnt his lesson and is now drug free. The court had heard how Mr Acromoes has always maintained a very strong work ethic and has been employed himself for the past 11 years. Judge Garrett Byrne, who was sentencing in the court, had this to say: "This is a serious and wicked offence which arose from what started as a trivial feud between you, Mr Carpenter, and Mr Tremaine Wiltshire." In the footage which was shown to the court, Mr Carpenter was clearly very angry and clearly out of control, and was intent on committing acts of violence. You were effectively threatening to commit a revenge attack. Had all the occupants been asleep inside the house, there was no guarantee that they could have awoken in time before the fire had taken a serious hold of the house. The risk was very high, and the risk was of causing very serious injury. It was extremely lucky, to say the least, that someone was awake in the house and at that time of night, and that the person that was awake was able to wake up her family and put out the fire. If the woman had been asleep, the situation could quite easily have been much more serious, and you would be receiving a completely different sentence. This crime is also aggravated by your previous convictions. The fact that this is a revenge attack in itself shows that there was indeed a significant degree of planning. You had gone to the address prepared to use a petrol bomb. Mr Carpenter was described as a very dangerous offender by the judge and was jailed for 12 years. This was with an extended license of 2 years. Extended sentences are being used more commonly now by UK judges and were introduced to replace the previous IPP sentences which were abolished. Extended sentences are only given to prisoners who are aged 18 and over and who are considered to be a significant risk to the public. An extended sentence may be given to a prisoner aged 18 or over when they are guilty of a specified violent or sexual offence. The court assesses that the prisoner is a significant risk to the public of committing further specified offences. A sentence of imprisonment for life is not available or justified, and the prisoner has a previous conviction for an offence which is listed in the Schedule 15B of the Criminal Justice Act of 2003, or the current offence justifies an appropriate custodial term of at least 4 years. The judge then decides how long the prisoner should stay in prison and also fixes the extended licence period for up to a maximum of 8 years. The prisoner will either be entitled to automatic release at the 2/3 point of the custodial sentence, or be entitled to apply for parole at that point. If parole is refused, the prisoner will be released when the prison term ends. Following release, the person will then be subjected to license conditions, where he or she will remain under supervision of the National Offender Management Service until the expiry date of the extended period. The combined total of prison term and extension period cannot be more than the maximum sentence for the offence committed. Since Mr Carpenter was given this type of sentence, he will spend at least 2/3 of his custodial term, which works out to be 8 years, behind bars. Mr Carpenter will then only be released before the end of his sentence if a parole board considers he is no longer a risk to the public. In the sentences of Mr Acramoes, the judge said that he accepted that there was an element of exploitation of Mr Acramoes by Mr Carpenter. However, it was a very serious attack and it had the potential for the loss of life. He jailed Mr Acramoes for 4 years. However, it has been revealed recently that Mr Carpenter has made an appeal to the Court of Appeals, where Mr Carpenter's legal team have argued that the sentence which was imposed by Judge Garrett Byrne was too harsh and too long. The Court of Appeal have heard that Mr Carpenter had bad blood with another Liverpool rapper whose real name is Tremaine Wiltshire, but is much more well known as the UK rapper Scouse Trapper Tremz. The rivalry had begun after Mr Carpenter had suggested that Mr Wiltshire should be brought to justice over an alleged attack which had happened to an ex-partner. Things had escalated quickly, and the day before the petrol bombing attack had happened, Mr Carpenter's grandparents' house was attacked by a group of men who were shouting "Carpo, you grass," an incident which was filmed on a mobile phone. It appears Mr Wiltshire had enraged Mr Carpenter by sharing the footage of the attack on his grandparents' house on his own Instagram account. In response to this taunt, Mr Carpenter had shared an Instagram live video of his own, in which he had threatened to light up the home of the victim, whose son was a friend of Mr Wiltshire's. Mike O'Brien, who was representing Mr Carpenter in his appeal process, had argued that Judge Byrne had exceeded the maximum sentence which was advised by the sentencing guidelines, which, although it is permissible in exceptional circumstances, this, in his opinion, was not justified for Mr Carpenter's offending. Mr O'Brien said that Judge Byrne had arrived at the sentence of 13 years and 4 months. This was before deducting a 10% as credit for Mr Carpenter's guilty pleas, which had come on the day that he was due to stand trial. The appeal court has also heard that the maximum range for the offence of this type is 12 years after trial. Mr O'Brien also argued that the original judge did not need to impose an extended sentence for this crime, a sentence which means that Mr Carpenter would not automatically be released on licence at the halfway stage of his sentence. In Mr O'Brien's opinion, if a determinate sentence was to be given to Mr Carpenter, it would still be long enough to reduce any risk to the public in the future. Mr O'Brien said that, in my submission, while very serious, the aggravating features in this case were not so serious as to justify a sentence outside the very top of the sentencing range. Mr O'Brien suggested that Mr Carpenter had expressed remorse in a pre-sentence report where he had told probation officers that he felt an instant regret over the offence which he had committed. Judge Lady Justice Carr, DBE, presiding over the appeal hearing, said that she in fact agreed with Judge Byrne that the offence was indeed very wicked. She also agreed that the dispute between Mr Carpenter, Mr Wiltshire and the victim's son was indeed very trivial. Judge Lady Justice Carr said the motive for the petrol bombing was as followed. On the previous day, on the July the 10th, 2020, Mr Carpenter's grandparents' home was attacked by a number of males. Missiles were thrown at the windows and shouts of "Carpo, you grass" could be heard. Someone filmed the incident and the footage was placed on the internet using Mr Wiltshire's account. Mr Wiltshire may have been reacting to previous messages from Mr Carpenter regarding an assault which was allegedly carried out by Mr Wiltshire on an ex-partner. Mr Carpenter had been very vocal in claiming that Mr Wiltshire should be brought to justice for the alleged assault. The bad blood between Mr Carpenter and Mr Wiltshire appears to have gone back quite a long way. Judge Carr noted that only the fact that the occupants of the house had been able to quickly extinguish the flames prevented a much more serious fire and potential loss of life. However,
At the end, I will
the
declare that was
victims
the case
did
for the
experience
defence.
stress, anxiety and sleepless nights over the incident, on top of her physical injuries, as well as having to go through financial hardship over the huge damage which had been caused to the living room. The appeal judge said, "This was a very serious example of this type of an offence, involving a high degree of planning and the use of an accelerant against a defenceless victim. It was, as Judge Garrett said, serious and wicked, arising from a trivial feud between Mr Carpenter and Mr Wiltshire. Mr Carpenter appeared to be out of control and intent of committing acts of violence in the footage which we have viewed, which was shared before the attack. Following the attack, more footage was posted in which Mr Carpenter was effectively gloating. It was fortunate that the victims were awake at the time of the attack. Had she been asleep, the situation could have resulted in a much more serious fire where people could have died. However, looking into the reason for appeal, Judge Carr said that in her opinion, Judge Byrne had in fact not presented adequate reasons for going outside the sentencing counsel range, which was one of between 5 and 12 years, before any credit for guilty pleas is deducted. Judge Carr had dismissed any other grounds of appeal, concluding that Judge Byrne was fully entitled, if he wished to, impose an extended sentence to Mr Carpenter. Judge Carr had also found that Mr Carpenter was indeed a dangerous offender under the sentencing guidelines. Judge Byrne said, "We see no basis for interfering with Judge Byrne's decision that an extended sentence was justified. However, in regards to Mr Carpenter's sentence being higher than the sentencing guidelines, Judge Carr decided that it was appropriate to have Mr Carpenter's sentence reduced from 12 years to 10 years in prison, whilst also advising that the extended 2-year licence period should remain." What are your opinions on the crime committed by Mr Carpenter? Do you believe his sentence was too excessive? Or do you believe he should have received a much longer sentence? What are your opinions on Mr Carpenter having his sentence reduced upon appeal? Do you agree with the judge's opinion that the sentence was in fact too harsh and therefore should have been reduced? Please let us know in the comments below. Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed this content, please don't forget to like and share, and if you're new to the channel, please don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell button so you can join us for the next video. Thank you for joining us, and until next time, stay safe.